Our dear
Well, good morning again. I did get here, so that guy who said I might not, he was wrong. Uh, okay, well. Our theme, as we have already mentioned this week, is infinite mystery. And it seems like, I don't know if you, well, with a young kid like Lane in our family pod, every year in around the 4th of July, he watches this stuff on TV called Shark Week, and it just comes back and it comes back and it comes back year after year after year. Well, this is, to me, this is sort of like Shark Week, but this seems like this is Job month in the church. And the way Shark Week comes back every single year, well, Job week seems to come back every single Sunday this month. And so I feel a little bit the way Bill Murray felt for the holiday Groundhog Day. Yeah, and it is Job. And earlier back in the July and August, it was David. And so I'm not sure that I recall these type of series in the past, but it is different. So we are still visiting Job, or Job is still visiting us. And our theme is infinite mystery. In recent weeks, we have been centering on the book of Job. And we have, over those weeks, considered once, God is not transactional. You can't bargain good things for good works. Mark Twain used to say, I'm going to keep my vices, that way if I get really sick, I have something to bargain with God about. And but that's not a sound theology. And so that week we talked about what is a sound theology, and that is that God simply loves all creation and has good things and bad things do happen to all people. Then the next week we talked, and the theme. I'm not strictly going with the theme, but I'm going with what the lesson taught me. That next week we went and visited the thought that God is never not there or not here. Never. Always God is everywhere. And the idea of us being alone from God isn't a perspective of where is God, it's a perspective of where is me, where I am. And I might feel alone, but it's not because God left. So this week we're going to continue with Job, and we're going to talk a little bit different because it's not so much visiting the woes of Job, which often are what we tend to focus on. We're going to be talking about the majesty. I'm going to be trying to talk about how do we cope with the majesty of a God that just doesn't necessarily fit in our mind. So we're going to be visiting both the thought of infinite and the thought of mystery. Our scripture story is about a conversation between God and Job, and we had a good introduction to that before Earl read it. And out of a tornado or a whirlwind, God taught Job. Now, well, most everything he said was questions, but I'm going to claim, and I think there are other teachers around who would agree with me, that many times good teachers teach by asking questions. And God asked questions. He didn't ask questions because God didn't know the answer. He asked questions as an exercise for Job to think about what the answer would be, to instruct or teach Job, to enlighten Job. So here are some of the teaching questions that God asked. And they're not all of them, and they're not necessarily in order, and I'm modernizing them into something closer to today talk. But who is it that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? What does that mean? Who is it that that confuses people by using words and lacks the knowledge to use those words, but they use them anyways, and then causing confusion? This whole thing, this relationship with God, should never be something that is something causing confusion. Then, okay, God asked Job, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth, or the foundation of creation, or when I brought these things into existence? Job, where were you? Were you measuring things? Were you out there pointing out where places were? No. And so where were you, Job? Well, Job actually would be part of creation, not out there causing creation. Another question, and he asks several questions, as Earl mentioned. This goes on and on, but some of these questions are kind of key questions, concepts that God is trying to instruct Job to come to an understanding of. Can you lift up your voice to the clouds so that a flood of waters will cover you? Can you make it rain on yourself? And this has been something for as long as man has made history. This has been something man has needed to have more influence on the natural water that rain gives us. When we're in droughts, we have problems, and sometimes when we're in droughts, people die. And okay, Job, can you? And in one place he says, "Can you tip the clouds over as though you tip a cloud over to get the water out?" Well, that's not how it works. But it doesn't matter that that's how it works. Actually, it matters that Job understands, I can't do this. This is beyond me. I cannot do this. And then there is sort of a natural cycle of, a natural cycle of nature. That sounds redundant. That is redundant. But who when it comes down to it, the question to Job, who is it that provides prey for the raven so that the raven can eat and can feed its young? Job, do you do that? Now, in our day and age, we can go to the store and we can get bird seed and we can put it out there. But, we didn't create that bird seed, and we didn't create the fact that the birds figure out how to eat it. But we can touch that a little bit, but we can't do it. We can't do it. There are so many birds that somebody, somehow, birds in general have to be fed. And Job, can you do that for all those birds? Even if we think we can touch a process a little bit, just touching that process does not do the job. So God asks all these questions, and they're mysteries, because somehow the rains do come out of the clouds. Somehow the ravens are fed. Somehow the young from the ravens are fed. Somehow someone did lay out the grand design of creation. Somehow in that grand design of creation, and God didn't bring this up with Job, but we have since learned, somehow in that grand design of creation, there was a cycle of, we breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, and trees take in carbon dioxide and turn it and give as a byproduct out oxygen. And this is a magical thing. I say magic, it's not, it's designed into the core foundation of creation, because our Creator can ask those kind of questions of us. And so it turns out that some of these questions aren't just for Job. Some of these questions are for us. And they talk about mysteries and infinite mysteries, things that have no limit, no bounds. You see, there are a lot of things for which we do not have answers. We simply don't. And Job did not have answers. Our modern update of the scripture story is about a conversation between God and us. Yes, Job was the person in the Bible with whom God was conversing, but talking out of a tornado, well, that's kind of mysterious. I have never lived through a tornado. I've lived through hurricanes, several, but I've never lived through a tornado. And I don't know that you can hear in a tornado other than the tornado, but God talked to Job out of this whirlwind, out of this tornado. And the tornado that we have our conversation with God in many ways is the whirling winds of history and events. Every time we turn around, we're surrounded by the knowledge of confusion happening, of wars happening, of death happening, of diseases. And yet, in all of that maelstrom of things happening, God does talk to us. Says to us, where were you when I laid out creation? Where were you when I placed it, when I laid out its foundation? Well, you know, we weren't there. We weren't doing that. We weren't holding the measure for him. In one case, he says, were you holding the line? That's how they make a straight line. They, hold a string and tighten it. And we weren't there. God did that. So it sounds like it's out of our control. So let's look at our teaching questions. Who is it that tells you that you don't count? Who is it that tells you that they don't count or they don't count? Who is it that tells us that? It's not God. It's not God. Because they are God's creation, as are the ravens and the young of the ravens. Where were you when I laid out the foundation of creation? Where were they? They are part of creation. And and in this case, I say, think of light years and galaxies and constellations and universes and planets and inhabitants. All are part of this creation that God laid out, set the foundation for, and put into motion. Are they able to lift up their voice to the clouds so that the clouds tip and pour out rain? No, they're the same as us, part of the creation, not the creator. We are not the creator. God is the creator. Are they able to lift up their voice and cause the waters to come down and cover us or cover themselves? Recall that the they many times are others who claim intimate God knowledge, and people who have tried to assure us that a disaster was, that's God retaliating against us for letting God down. The first week of the month, Richard was explaining about a preacher who blamed our behavior as why God did something to get even with us. And that was the cause of a flood until his house got flooded. that wasn't retaliation against him, of course. I mean, sometimes these theys have things that they want to claim. I have intimate God knowledge, and maybe not so much. Who provides for the raven and the lioness and the owl and even the serpent? Who provides the prey for them? And when the young cry and cry out for need, how did God set up for them to be fed? When have you, or a prime minister, or a president, or a king, or other ultimate person provided for all of these? I don't think any of us have. And I think that's what God was trying to get Job to realize. These things don't require you. These things are gifts for you, are gifts toward you. Mysteries, infinite mysteries. You see, we don't have answers. We just simply don't. The flood water is not retaliating against anybody. And it's not my job to judge and say, oh, that flood is retaliating against that person because that person sinned. It's not, I don't get paid enough. It's beyond my pay grade. We are so significant in the pattern of eternity, but we are not, but we are most significant in enabling and showing the path to the eternal, not being the eternal. Oh, we so are. So infinite mystery. Mystery is defined as something that is difficult or impossible to understand or explain. And infinite is defined, it has, both of these have many definitions. I'm picking one that makes sense with today's theme. Infinite means endless in space, extent, or size. Impossible to measure or calculate. That's key. Impossible to, it may be so big that there just isn't a big enough measurement, or it may be so small that there's just not a possible measurement. It could be either way. Something that all we say is, man, that's big. The Grand Canyon is big, but it can be measured. You could calculate how, those trucks that we have out here that have rocks jump out of them and hit our windshield and crack our windshield. Those trucks, you could calculate how many of those trucks it would take to fill the Grand Canyon with gravel. Now, it'll be a very big number, but it's a number. That's not infinite. That's not infinite. Infinite means you can't calculate it. It's bigger than, it's not. It's beyond counting. It's beyond measuring. So what is infinite mystery? It might be even doubly undefinable. If this is the case, then what was God teaching Job? Humans cannot understand God completely. Humans can get an inkling, but God, a definition of God, will not fit into our mind. It can't, because our mind is limited. A definition of God is not possible because it's beyond definition, it's beyond counting, it's beyond measure. And to claim to understand and require God to act in a particular way is, on our part, prideful and improper. I cannot go to God and tell God that this person or that person is so good or so bad that this must be the judgment upon them. I can't do that because that's not in the definition of God. That's not for me to pick and define as God. And that's what God was telling Job. I did okay with this measuring out the foundation of creation. So don't tell me how to form creation. You already did it. And Job, on the other hand, oh, well, yeah, I guess you did. Where were you when I did it? Well, gosh, I guess I was part of the product of what you did. So it's not my job, and it's not our jobs collectively to go to God and tell God, okay, here is your prophecy to us. Question in the helps for the speaker's helps on the church website, it asks the question of to think about for the congregation. If God was to speak to you or your congregation this Sunday, what would God say? What would God say? Well, I'll give you two examples. In some congregations, in some churches, in some people's theology, they think that God would say, shame on Sam and Sally, for they are sinners. Excuse me. And you know that I'm not going to say God can't say that. That's God's business. I don't think that matches what my understanding of God is. And I don't think that matches the understanding that God was trying to get Job to understand. It would be more likely, I believe, that if God spoke, I created all of you and love all of you unconditionally. Now, that to me would be more of a speech from God that makes sense to me, that validates what I believe about God. So if God is infinite, and if I could never comprehend God, then some people might say that you and I just need to stop doing it, stop, because God's there and God's large and in charge, and all I need to do is just sit here because God's got it all. And you know what? I don't think that's it either. Because God is out there, God is infinite, we can't understand God. In spite of that, I think we are meant to try to look at the direction of God, that we're intended to try to understand a way that we can live our life in such that it points toward God, that my life points toward God, that your life points toward God, indicates God. So should we just give up and do nothing and just wait for this final eternal reckoning that God handles everyone, and the ones that deserve and the ones that don't deserve? I'm just asking. I think the answer is no. Out of the tornado of today's whirling history and events, God teaches us by asking questions. And I think God continues as a most remarkable teacher. The New Thought teaching, who is this that tells you that this is absolute truth, but they don't have absolute knowledge? Who can tell me, here is an absolute truth, I give you this, it's an absolute truth, but oh, I don't have absolute knowledge? That would be one of the first things God talked about. People that breed confusion. Where were you when I laid out the foundation of creation? Yes, where were you? Where were you, Jim? Think of the light years in the galaxies, like I mentioned earlier, the constellations. Are you able to lift up your voice to the clouds and spill them over so that the rain comes out? We are so insignificant in the pattern of eternity, but we are most significant in the love of God. God loves every one of us deeply, deeply. We are so insignificant, and yet we are part of that pattern of eternity. So I propose these answers. I understand, I think that understanding or comprehending God or God's creation is not going to fit into a human mind ever. God and creation are much bigger than the container, so to speak. And I think that that's true. We all try to do the best that we can, but we must do our best very humbly and without harming others ever. It's not our right to harm others ever. Another word for simplification is generalization. And another term for oversimplification can be overgeneralization. We must work against oversimplification and overgeneralization. It is a simplification to say God is love, but it is also a true thing. That may not be over simplification. So not all simplification is bad, just oversimplifying. These can harm people and cause more damage than good. So my advice is that we seek and we follow a kindness and a temperance in this finite existence where we are. Finite means you can count it, you can measure it, you can contain it. And that we follow a kindness and a temperance in this existence that will serve well in an infinite or an eternal existence. In other words, that we find the finite life that we lead as one that we can represent proudly when we're in the infinite, when we're in the eternal. You can't take it with you, but you can take your reputation with you, is what I'm saying. Basically, love your neighbor meets the needs of this day. If we will love our neighbor, that will do the right thing. And ultimately, love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself meets all these needs. Now, that's a simplification. I don't think that's an oversimplification. I'd like to invite you. I want to offer you this invitation. Would you like to feel closer and clearer in your relation to God, the Creator, and eternity? You know, that voice in the whirlwind. Do you feel that God created you for a specific purpose? Do you not feel this? Please sit and share this with us. Not this instant, but in your life, in our conversations. Share that you feel and what you feel your purpose for being created is. How do you feel about being part of the community around you? Now, this is the community of Christ, but we live in neighborhoods. We go to schools, we work, we have a city that we're part of. We have a county, a state. We're part of these different communities. How do you feel about being a part of the community around you? You're not an island. Be part of that. Be a knowledgeable part of that community. How do you feel about your primary relationships, your family? Talk with us and share with us. I invite you to share those thoughts and feelings with us. I invite you to consider that you have vision, and can see the mysterious. Maybe not to the point of understanding it, because the mysterious is perhaps not understandable, but that you have a grasp of something, and you can see that direction and help us all to see this direction, the things that are beyond the horizon. And I will support you in striving toward your vision. The idea about being a Christian, part of the Christian community, the idea is that we realize that our life, our breath, comes from this eternal God. Had God not laid out that foundation and asked those questions of Job, we would be sitting here saying, why? We would be at a loss. But God did. And God told Job, your insignificance actually is proof of your significance in God's love. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, for that message.